Hello everyone, welcome to this new deck tech video, and today we're going to talk about the infamous Boba Green. So Boba Green is, in my opinion, the best deck in the meta right now. So this is the deck to beat. This is the deck that if you are building a deck for Star Wars Unlimited and you're trying to be competitive, you need to playtest against this deck because this deck will see a lot of play, and it is, in my opinion, one of the most powerful deck in the game, honestly. So we'll obviously go into this video on why is it the most powerful deck, what is the best way to counter it, and how to play it optimally, and I'll try to get the best out of this. Obviously, we're talking about Star Wars Limited, a very skill-intensive game, so playing a good deck is not enough. You need to know how to play with it, and this is what we're going to be trying to explore today. But first of all, let's talk about this is my list. So my experience, I have an extensive experience with this deck. I've been playing this deck for a very long time, competed in tournament, even won tournaments with this deck. So I have a pretty good, decent experience on this. So. And yeah, without further ado, let's go into why this deck is so good. So this Boba Green is what you would call, what we like to call a good stuff deck, meaning a deck that regroups some of the strongest cards in the game and just put them in one perfect package. And what makes Boba Fett so strong is Boba Green so strong is like not only does he play so many strong cards, it also plays card that happens to have very good synergies with one another, and this is what we'll get into the more details exactly how exactly that works. So first of all, let's talk about Boba as a leader, because this is actually the first video that I make about Boba, at least a deck tech about Boba, and Boba is the strongest leader in the game for multiple reasons. The first reason is that he has the highest stats for price in the game. There's simply no other leader that comes at 4 attack, 7 HP on turn 4. There's just no other leader that does this. Second reason is because his leader ability is very good. The ability to unexhaust, to ready resources throughout the turn for free and without even needing an action for it is also extremely powerful. And basically, the other thing that's very strong about this is that you can basically kill something, unexhaust a resource, and then deploy Boba, attack with Boba, and then ready 2 additional resources. And that's, you basically can ready 3 resources in one turn the time you play him, which allows you to play some very good 3-drop, and coincidentally, Boba also happens to be playing some of the best 3-drops in the game. So another also very strong thing going on with Boba is his color combination. He's yellow-black, which contains some of the strongest cards in the game, including some cards that specifically work with Boba and nothing else, which obviously means that he just has a better card pool than everybody else. And when you get to add this, the green-black card pool, which is the strongest card pool in the game, you end up with a very powerful cocktails. So how does this cocktail works exactly? So the way things work is that Boba is a mid-range deck that can play aggro or can play control depending on the situation. So it's really a typical mid-range deck that can really switch from aggro to mid-range relatively handily. And it also has a tempo element to it, where it can also play a game where it puts some pressure early on and then just prevents you from playing until it kills you. And what makes Boba very scary is that it's a deck that has a relatively good amount of interaction. It has a lot of ways to interact with you, but still maintain an ability to kill you extremely quickly. And I don't think there's any other deck in the game that can actually do that. So one is the typical game plan when we're going to be playing Boba. So usually the turn 1 play is not particularly strong. Boba is not a particularly good deck in the very early stage of the game. But that's fine. He's going to be playing some pretty decent 2-drop. Then typically on turn 2 it's going to be trying to ramp either with resupply or super laser technician. So it's not playing any 4-drop. As you can see, our list is not playing 4-drop because our main goal is to jump directly from the turn 2 to the turn 4 plays, where we're going to be playing our 5 drops and deploy Boba Fett at the same time. And the idea is playing the 5 drops one turn earlier, play Boba one turn earlier, use the double ready ability that we talked about. So typically, you play a Bosk, you kill something, you unexhaust the resources with Boba, you deploy a Boba, you attack with Boba, you ready 2 additional resources, that's 3 resources you've readied, and then you can play a Boba or a 7th Fit Defender. So you play on the same turn the best 5 drop in the game, Bosk, the best leader in the game, Boba, and you also play the best 3 drop in the game, Boba Disintegrator. So those turns are like pretty absurd, and they put you very, very far ahead. And once you're very, very far ahead by doing crazy stuff like this, you can basically end the game by just playing some Fire Spray, which is one of the best finisher in the entire game. And you have a very, very oppressive cocktails that is just incredibly to deal with. So let's talk about the base then. Of course, we are playing Energy Conversion Lab, the best base in the game, and we have plenty of ways in this deck to make use of it and get the maximum potential out of it. So typically we're going to be using it for Super Laser Technician as a way to ramp and kill something at the same time. Obviously for our Steadfast Battalion, it's not bad with Fast Fire Spray because you can actually use ECL to ambush with the Fast Fire Spray, and then the when played a trigger of Fire Spray can trigger and you can unexhaust Fire Spray. So you can literally ambush and then have your Fire Spray unexhaust at the same time, which is pretty crazy. So you can kill something, and then with your Fire Spray you can either attack something else or attack the base. And obviously it's also very good with 7th Fit Defender when you want to stabilize space. One of the ECL with Boba is one of the strongest combo in the game, because Boba has the ability, the Boba Disintegrator has the ability to deal 6 damage to a unit that is been exhausted, that has attacked this turn, and that didn't come into play this turn. So this is an ability that's relatively easy to play around. But with Boba and ECL, we can basically play this out of nowhere. I'll go into more details once you get to Disintegrator. But basically, got tons of great use for ECL, which makes it a very, very powerful base. So now let's go into every single early drop that we have. So first of all, we'll talk about Greedo. Greedo is, as I said, the best 1 drop in the game. Is basically a great card to play on turn 1, even if you only cost 1 resources. So even if you're not utilizing all of your resources properly, which is often going to be the case. Often you're going to be playing Greedo without anything else behind it because we don't play any other 1 drop. And that's completely fine because Greedo is simply here to be a turn 1 play that is here to trade with the enemy Sabine or the enemy Battlefield Marine. Instead of Greedo, you can also play a Viper Probe Droid, which is kind of does something similar, but Viper Probe Droid costs 2, has 1 more toughness, but it doesn't have the when defeated ability. You can either play one or the other. What I like about Greedo is that he's going to be easier to kind of like play alongside other things later on in the game, because the fact that he costs only 1 doesn't really matter when you're playing him on turn 1, but it does matter a lot when you play it later on in the game, because you can play, if you're on 4, you can play a 3 drop and then you can play Greedo alongside him, or you can just simply kill something, use Boba ability to ready your resources, and then suddenly you can squeeze a Greedo. So I like to have at least one resource card that I can kind of play at any moment. I think that's just very, very, very good. Next we got the Crafty Smuggler. So Crafty Smuggler is a card that doesn't look amazing on paper, but it actually is amazing. Shielded, cheap units that are shielded are just very difficult and annoying to deal with, and unless you have very specific weapons to deal with them. And Crafty Smuggler is just an excellent way to get yourself some early board state board presence that's going to stick to the board relatively handily, and it's going to be relatively difficult to deal with. Once a Crafty Smuggler in here, it can basically kill anything that is a 3-2 or 3-1, which there are multiple cards like this in the game, or you can be able to kill a 3-3 in 2 ways, over 2 turns. Taking a long time to kill something is not really that big of a deal because it's a card that is supposed to be flying really early on in the game. So, yeah, Crafty Smuggler has just performed very, very well since it's been introduced to the game. and is a very solid 2-drop that you're happy to be playing. Next, we got Seasoned Shore Trooper. So the interesting things is that usually people, the Crafty Smuggler really sees play no matter what. The Seasoned Shore Trooper is a bit more hanging in the balance. Some people prefer to play the Viper Probe Droid. Viper Probe Droid is typically going to be better against aggro because it can trade with the Sabine or it can trade with the Battlefield Marine. While Seasoned Shore Trooper is better against control because it represents a threat on the battlefield that is a little bit harder to kill with its 3 HP. And more importantly, if the control deck does not deal with it, the card becomes a 4/3 later on in the game, which is a huge deal. So pretty much the reason why I'm playing Seasoned Shore Trooper over Viper Probe Droid is because Seasoned Shore Trooper is better against Boba and all the control decks, like the Aiden and the Krennic decks, while Viper Probe Droid is really better against aggro. So I prefer they're just more decks in which Seasoned Shore Trooper is better, and we already have a good match against aggro anyway. So I just prefer to help to a card that will help in the mirror match, because once you get to up to 6 resources, Seasoned Shore Trooper really becomes a very big threat. It's also an excellent card to pull out of Vader, and it's a card that is really good to use with Overwhelming Barrage. So I'm really a big fan of Seasoned Shore Trooper. We play a lot of RAM, so we get to those 6 resources relatively easily. So it's just an excellent card. Then we got Kata Spacer, which is here to provide a bit of presence in space. Not necessarily super easy to trigger, but honestly, just a 2/3 for 2 in space to give us a bit of space ball presence is great. It's a great card to pull out of Vader. You play Vader, this card coming to play can exhaust something that costs 4 or less. So you're not always going to use the ability, but that's okay. It's not the best 2-drop in the game, but I think having some board presence in space is important, especially for a deck like Boba, which actually the space presence can sometimes be its weakness. Sorry. Sometimes Boba, lack of space presence in the early stages of the game can be a very big problem. So Counter Spacer really compensate with that weakness very well. Next we got Boba Fett Disintegrator, which is, in my opinion, the best 3-drop in the game. Just absolutely amazing stat, 3/5 for 3. So the ability to deal 3 damage to a unit that you're attacking if that unit is exhausted and did not interplay this round. So a lot of conditions to make that happen, which makes it a card that is relatively easy to play around. But obviously there's many, even if this ability did not exist, I still think Boba would be a pretty good card. But this ability of course makes it a very big threat. Your opponent is going to be afraid to attack you because they're afraid to open themselves up for Boba. Unless they can kill Boba, but not that easy to do since he has 5 HP. An excellent card to pull out of Vader. One of the best cards to use in combination with Energy Conversion Lab. So you basically play Energy Conversion Lab, and you can basically ambush something out of nowhere, and you can kill something that has 6 HP out of nowhere, which is just extremely powerful because it is very easy to play around Boba once you know he's on the board, but if he's not on the board, it becomes extremely difficult to play around. So there's a reason why this card is that expensive, and obviously it's an automatic 3-of in the deck, and really if you're not playing this card, unfortunately you're really making your deck a lot worse. Moving on, we got 7th Fleet Defender. 7th Fleet Defender is a very difficult unit to deal with for the same reason as Crafty Smuggler, but the big difference is that it has 3 attack, which means that it can pretty much kill most of the space units, at least the early game space unit, like the A-Wings, the Consortium Star Vipers, the X-Wings, the Ak-170. It just basically deals with everything without dying, and puts some pressure in space at the same time. It's one of the best 3-drop in the game, and in my opinion the best 3-drop in space. Just an excellent card that really requires very specific weapon to be dealt with cleanly. So an excellent card, and obviously it is in our colors, so we absolutely want to play this. We really value 3-drops, particularly in Boba Green, simply because, as I said, during our Boba turn we can basically unexhaust up to, we can ready up to 3 resources, which is enough to play either a 7th Fleet Defender or Boba Fett, which is exactly what we want. Next, we're going to talk about the card that is, once again, one of the most important cards of the deck. It is obviously Super Laser Technician. So, the interesting thing about about Boba and about ramp in Boba is like Ramp in a deck like Vader is the engine that is needed for the deck to function. And you need preferably as much ramp as you can, like a traditional ramp deck you would find in Magic the Gathering or other games. Ramp in Boba is a bit different. Ramp in Boba is more like a combo piece that allows you to get to a very specific point of the game much faster, one turn earlier actually, and take over the game uh, tremendously because of that. So Super Laser Technician and all the other ramp for that matter, really in Boba has to be played specifically on turn 2. If it's played any later than this, it's not nearly as good. So if you're playing a Boba Green, you are really looking for that ramp on turn 2. This is the most powerful thing you can do on turn 2 is play a Super Laser Technician, either with ECL to kill something or not. It depends on the situation. But it is the most powerful thing you can play on turn 2 because suddenly your Boba comes one turn earlier, your 5 drops, which you have plenty of, comes one turn earlier. This color combination, Cunning, is known for having very few good 4 drops. So basically jumping from 3 drops to 5 drops is a huge deal for the deck. So basically, I think this deck is one of the reasons that makes Boba Green so much better than other versions of Boba, in my opinion, is this ability to get into the Boba turn, the big Boba turn, one turn earlier than everybody else. And that's such a big, big, big deal. So obviously, it's a tremendous card in the deck. The weakness, of course, of this card is like if it's drawn any later than this, you can still play it on turn 3 sometimes. It's not going to be as good, but it will allow you to deploy your Boba one turn earlier, which if you can use ECL with it to get your resource right away. But it really is much worse, and then any later than turn 3, it's pretty much useless because we don't play a lot of expensive cards. I think the only expensive card that we play is Vader. So yeah, Super Laser Technician on turn 2 is the strongest thing you can do on turn 2. One of the things that if you're playing against Boba, we'll talk about this about the counter of Boba, but if you can prevent the Boba players from cracking his Super Laser Technician on the turn after he played it, that's a very, very big deal. Then we got Resupply. So when people first started building Boba Green, most people did not play the Resupply. Most people were only relying on Super Laser Technician. And very quickly people realized that being able to get the Boba turn one turn earlier was so important and so powerful that it was worth it to double your chance of doing it by playing Resupply. So as I said, don't see this card as a ram card like you would see in a Vader deck. See this as a combo piece for the big Boba turn one turn earlier, which is just huge. So in my opinion, Resupply is absolutely has become completely a mainstay now in Boba Green because once again, if you're playing only a Super Laser Technician, you are reducing by 100% your chance of finding this nuts draw, which is the turn 2 Super Laser Technician into the Boba turn one turn earlier, and that is so incredibly powerful. So obviously this is a card that you're going to be resourcing if you draw any later than this, and having a lot of resupply can give you some top decks, some bad top decks, but to be honest, with the ability to draw 2 cards per turn, it's rare that you're not going to find anything else to play later on in the game. So it's really not that big of a deal, and once again, increasing your chances of getting this nut draw is just so important. Talking about the nut draw, we're talking about the best 5 drop in the game, Bosk. Bosk is absolutely incredible, great stats, immediate impact on the game, come into play, kill something. And then if your opponent does not deal with him, his ability to deal 2 damage to any unit for any event you play is just incredible. So I don't think Bosk ability is relevant enough for you to be building your entire deck around it, but we do play quite a few events. So it's kind of like, think of it as it's just like for Greedo. If you can use the ability, it's nice. If you can't, that's no big deal. The card has already done its job. So as I was saying earlier, Bosk being a 5 drops coming to play on the same turn as Boba. You play the Bosk, you kill something, you ready resource with Boba, you summon Boba, you attack Boba, ready to turn resources, play a 3 drop, and you've just completely taken over the game by that point. An incredible card and the best 5 drop in the game that fits perfectly in the curve of what Boba wants to do, and is in the right color combination as well. Another 5-drop, a bit more exotic, is Steadfast Battalion, which is a card that has been, I don't think is very strong in a vacuum, but is very well positioned because of his ability, because it's the only card in the game, the only 5-drop in the game that can have, that can deal 7 damage to something, and the turn it arrives thanks to Energy Conversion Lab. So the idea of this card is to play it on the same turn as Boba deploys. So you deploy the Boba, and then you basically use Energy Conversion Lab to play Steadfast Battalion, and you end up with a 7/7 Overwhelm, which allows you to one-shot the enemy leaders that have 7 HP. So Battalion is amazing against Krennic, amazing against Boba, and amazing against Luke. And for that reason alone, a strong, powerful card that is a direct counter to the most powerful deck in the game, this on its own is enough to justify this card in the main deck, in my opinion. But obviously the card is not completely pointless. Regardless, it's still a very big card that is very difficult, that is going to be super powerful. And the good thing about Boba is that Boba is relatively difficult to kill. 7 HP, the Boba leader, 7 HP, very difficult to kill. So having the Battalion on your side really going to help you. So it's at the same time, it's a great counter against you, but it's also a card that you're really happy to play, especially in a mirror match. Another 5-drop that this time is a bit more of my own take, because you're not typically going to see many Boba players playing Traitorous, but I'm personally a big fan of this card. I think this card is very underplayed. And it's very underplayed because not only is it a very powerful card, but it's also very powerful against Boba. Because Boba plays some of the best 3-drop in the game, so obviously having a card that steals those 3-drops is huge. Also, if you happen to ramp earlier than your opponent, and you can sometimes play Traitors against the opponent Energy Conversion Lab, and from that point you're going to be very far ahead. So no, Traitors is just a great card. It's great against the 2-drop into Wing Leader opening, which you're going to see a lot from aggro players. It's just a very powerful card. I play this as a 2 of, just for the opponent to respect it. It's the kind of card that also shines as if very few people play it, very few people respect that this card exists. Especially early on when people are not so familiar with all the cards in the game, you can really get yourself a very nice advantage by playing Traitorous and really taking your opponent by surprise. I'm not really taking anybody by surprise anymore with this card because most people who play against me know that I love this card. But if you're not me, then it's a card that is really going to take people by surprise and really powerful. I honestly think that even when people try to play around it, it's still an incredibly powerful card. Next on the, so before we had the Fate Fire Spray, so Fate Fire Spray is gonna be our 6 drops. This is basically the card that you follow up with after you did the big Boba turn, and Fire Spray is really the hammer that really puts the opponent in the back foot. So you put your opponent on the back foot with the super strong Boba turn when you get to play the most powerful leader in the game, a very strong 5-drops, a very strong 3-drop, all in the same turn, and then you basically try to finish him off with that Fire Spray to put huge amount of pressure. So Fire Spray comes to play, will attack the base, deal 5 a days. Obviously, what makes this card so incredibly good is the ability to come into play ready. This card comes into play ready whether Boba Fett is a leader or a unit. That means that even if your Boba has been defeated, and is not he still counts as being in play. The leader at least still counts as being in play. Basically, a leader always counts as being in play. And that way, Fate Fire Spray always comes unexhausted, which is very powerful. The ability to exhaust enemy non-unique unit for 2 resources, very rarely relevant, but keep that in mind though, because sometimes it can be useful. But it is honestly a very niche ability. The main reason to play Fate Fire Spray is just an incredibly difficult card to deal with. 6 HP into space, there's not that many cards that can kill it, and it puts so much pressure, just comes to play, deal 5, then arrive in and deal 5. In my opinion, it is the most powerful unit in the deck, and I believe that this is the card that makes the difference between playing a Boba deck and not playing a Boba deck, is that having access to that Fire Spray is just absolutely incredible. And it's going to finish game very... The ability for Boba to finish game so quickly mostly come from this card. preferably, unless you really have multiple fire sprays in hand, try to never resource that card because it's so important. Then we got the good old classic Darth Vader, which is obviously an incredibly powerful unit, as you probably know. Immediate impact on the game, can put multiple units on the board at the same time, and just a very solid follow-up after the fetch fire spray to take once again over the game even more so. This is more when you're on a control plan, which this deck can definitely go for sometimes. Vader is going to be kind of your late game unit that's going to put some pressure. But keep in mind that as a Boba, your late game is good, but not nearly as good as some of the other decks. So if you're trying to go for the control plan, always have a plan to deal damage quickly so you can close out the game very quick. So typically from Vader, we're going to pick up Boba Fett, 7th Fleet Defender, if we need space presence. Short Trooper is also very good as a 4-3. And Counter Spacer as a way to exhaust a unit that you do not want to attack. That also can be a good card as well. Now let's talk about the removals and the more situational cards. So we have one copy of Shoot First. Shoot First is an excellent way to it's a kind of a removal that requires a unit to be in play, and is very cheap, efficient. What is very good about it is you can pay it for one, kill something, and then basically get back your resources right away using Boba's ability, and that is just extremely powerful, especially against aggro, because being able to kill something for free in the aggro matchup just makes a huge difference. It is a bit situational, that's why we only play one, but we have more copies in the sideboard, especially for the aggressive matchup. Next we got No Good to Me Dead, which is one of the most efficient way to deal with a unit, and is very good in the context of a tempo plan, when we're trying to buy ourselves sometimes, while we're basically beating on the opponent at the same time. So very strong on very, very big units, very cheap, very efficient. It's not good against everything. I mostly like it personally on the aggro matchup and on the mirror of mid-range when we're both kind of attacking each other. And No Good to Me Dead is going to be a big tempo swing in our favor, tapping down large units. Very good against the enemy fire sprays, for example. Like basically this card, if you're playing as another Boba deck and plays a fire spray and you play No Good to Me Dead on it, you basically saved 10 HP by tapping down this fire spray for 2 turns. That is just a crazy amount of value for such a cheap card. It's also a cheap event that's going to allow you to trigger your Bosk. So I just think it's a great card. It's not as amazing as people made it to be when it was first revealed, but still is a very, very powerful card. It's a card I usually side out against control, because against control, tapping down a big unit usually doesn't make that big of a difference, especially if that unit is Sentinel. But in against aggro and against mid-range, it's an excellent card, and it does something that no other card in the game can do. So just for that reason, it is worth playing. Next we got Surprise Strike. So obviously when we are going for the tempo aggro plan, Surprise Strike is going to be our finisher that allows us to finish the opponent very quickly and close out games. Surprise Strike is the best cunning card in the game, one of the best cards in the game, an absolute 3 of. I think everybody who plays less than 3 copies of Surprise Strike is very wrong. Yes, it's situational, but it is one of the most powerful cards in the deck. It also can be used to kill large units. It also can be used as a pseudo removal, but obviously most of the time you're going to be using it as a finisher. And on that note, it is just incredible. Plus 3 attack for 2 resources is just absurd, and the amount of damage you can do. If you are in the late game situation and you got a Surprise Strike to the Boba Fett and then Fight Fire Spray in hand, you are looking at something that's going to deal around 13 damage to the opponent, very likely, and very difficult to interact with. Just absolutely massive, and the amount of game that you're going to be winning on the back of this card is just tremendous. So next we got Waylay. So Waylay is our flexible answer, once again in the tempo kind of idea. We tap down stuff with No Good to Me Dead, we bounce things with Waylay while we're putting on the pressure with those fire spray, with those Boba Fett, with very efficient units. And Waylay is a way to deal notably with large units that really block the board, that we want to have a hard removal spell against them. So Waylay is going to be a way to deal with that. Obviously it's not a real hard removal, people can just play it back the turn after. But in this game where tempo is such a big deal, bouncing a unit back in his opponent's hand is almost as good as killing it most of the time. And the fact that it's very cheap is super relevant. An absolute amazing card. It's a main answer against people who are going to be playing big Sentinel units. The Waylay is going to be the way to kind of counter that. So, absolute great card. Then we obviously have the Overwhelming Barrage on more of the control aspect of the deck, where this deck also has the ability to completely take over the game and stabilize the game like a control deck would, using Overwhelming Barrage. We're playing a lot of cards that comes to play early, that have attack, like Boba Fett himself as a leader for attack. Um, Even on the Short Trooper that gets 4 attack very easily. Overwhelming Barrage on Bosk is amazing because you are dealing 6 from the barrage and then plus 2 damage from the Bosk as well. Barrage on Vader, great. Barrage on Fett Fire Spray is amazing. Barrage on pretty much everything, right? On Steadfast Battalion is also great. Completely wipes the opponent board while giving us the +2/+2, which is super relevant to once again attack into base, deal those big damage. It's the best card in the deck, in the game, and a very, very strong card in this deck. So absolutely amazing. So now I'm going to do a little break here to go back into the sideboard. So we'll pretty much cover the main deck. So in the sideboard we have 2 additional copies of Shoot First, which is going to be our anti aggro card, just against aggro. As I said, very, very cheap removal spells, extremely useful against aggro. Consortium Star Viper. So Star Viper is a very strong card in this deck in 2 reasons. First of all, it's great against, it's basically really neatly compensates the weakness of the deck. So as you can see, we don't play a lot of space units. Until Fire Spray, we are relatively vulnerable in space. So Consortium Star Viper is a really nice way to kind of compensate with that weakness. It's really good in combination with Energy Conversion Lab. You place them on CCL, you kill on A-Wing, you heal your base at the same time. Such a great deal. So yeah, so this is typically going to be, some people play Star Viper in the main deck to make their aggro matchup even better. Personally, I think that the deck has a very good matchup against aggro already, so I don't think you need to play Star Viper in the main deck. But if you think that aggro is going to be really, really present, and you want to make this deck even better against aggro, you can put some Star Vipers in the main deck and see how that goes. So yeah, going back to Star Viper here. Yeah, so after this we got the Change of Heart. So Change of Heart is going to be the anti-control color. So basically against control, the way you want to win this game is by playing the tempo game, where you're going to be dealing with your opponent units, using Waylay, putting some pressure, and really going for the Boba turn, putting multiple threats on the turn on the same turn, which is Boba is really great at this. And try to finish the game with a Fire Spray. Fire Spray is one of the great card against control, one of the best card you could have against control. But sometimes we need to have additional finishers, we need to have abilities to finish the game, and Change of Heart is an excellent finisher against control, because control is typically going to be playing very large units to kind of settle the game, to kind of stabilize the game. While Change of Heart can use those large units against him to finish the game off. So that's why I really love Change of Heart as a way to counter control in the later stage of the game. Reinforcement Walker is more of an extra late game card that's going to be useful in the mirror match, or typically against other mid-range decks that are a bit grindy, and in which a couple of late game cards can really make a huge difference. Typically, I would want to have this card against Luke, Luke Reed mid-range, Han mid-range, or obviously Boba mid-range. I also like to play this card against control, even though against control going late game is not really going to be a good idea, because most of the time he's going to have better late game than us. But it's still nice to have, even though it doesn't really obey the tempo game plan that is preferable in this matchup. So this is pretty much it for the deck as a whole. Now let's talk about a couple of cards that can be some good consideration if you want to play Boba and want to change different things. So for example, we already talked about Viper Probe Droid, which can be a replacement either for Greedo or for Seasoned Short Trooper. If you want to improve your matchup against aggro, you can basically put Viper Probe Droid instead of Seasoned Short Trooper, and you're going to have a better aggro matchup because you're going to have more ways to trade with the Battlefield Marines and the Sabine on turn 1. Another card that can be good against aggro that I do not include in my deck is Cell Block Guard. I'm already playing like a lot of 3 drops, so I didn't really find space for Cell Block Guard, and especially after the Star Viper, but Cell Block Guard or Sentinel units are really good against aggro, and it's a great card to pull from Vader. So it is a consideration as well if you want to be against aggro. I don't personally play it in my deck because I think that I have better things to do, and I also believe that this deck has a very good matchup against aggro. Which brings me to my next topic. How about the matchups? Well, against aggro, as I said multiple times in this video already, Boba Green has an excellent matchup against aggro, and the reason for this is simply because the aggro mid-range in general has a good matchup against aggro because typically aggro is not going to be fast enough to kill a mid-range deck before this mid-range deck comes online. And then once the mid-range deck comes online, it usually takes over the game relatively quickly. But specifically, Boba is so strong as mid-range because it has tons of ways it can kill the threat, it can kill the upcoming aggro threat, and at the same time deploy its own threat at the same time. So typically you're going to be playing a boss who can come into play, kill something relatively large, for example, kill a K2SO, something as big as K2SO, and still have a 4-1 into play afterward. That is ridiculous. It's very powerful. You can, once again, you can ECL a 7th Fleet Defender into an A-Wing, and you still got like your 3-2 in space. Like there's just so many ways you can kill stuff and still deploy, and your Boba deploys very early, can deploy relatively early and be a huge threat, and Boba and Fed Fire Spray can very easily race an aggro deck. So it is just a very powerful deck, and obviously Overwhelming Barrage is amazing against aggro, especially in a Boba deck when you can put so many units that have relatively high attack relatively early on in the game. So obviously you also have No Good to Me Dead, and Shoot First are excellent ways to kind of buy time, and once again Surprise Strike super helpful to race the game. So the game plan of the deck just really works very well against aggro, generally speaking. And then after sideboard it becomes even better with the Star Vipers and the Shoot First. So against mid-range, Boba is typically the best mid-range deck, not because of the matchup, but simply because in terms of the quality of the card and the powerfulness of the interactions. And then obviously against control, this is where it gets really weird, because normally control deck should beat Boba, because usually control beats mid-range, right? But in reality, it doesn't really happen that way, because of the Boba turn, the ability to just put loads of units on the battlefield in a very short period of time, and then have some follow-up that have immediate impact on the game, like Fire Spray, is just incredibly difficult to deal with for control deck. So even against control, often you're gonna have 50% matchup. Is like if the control deck can survive the Boba turn, it's gonna be fine. But if you can't, and often it can't, it will die. And so even against control, I think the Boba is gonna have a 50-50 matchup. It's just that good. It's just incredibly good. So, and this is the reason why I think Boba is the best deck in the game, simply because it has a lot of very good matchups, and the bad matchups are not really bad matchup. Their bad matchup is 50%, 50-50. I believe the strongest deck against Boba is Vader, and even that deck has like a 55% win rate. That's not great. That is really not great. So yeah, it's an incredibly powerful deck, and obviously if you want to win a tournament, Boba Green would be my pick. It would probably be the deck I would be the most scared of. Is it unbeatable? I don't think so. No, it's not unbeatable. Obviously, as I said, control deck usually can have a 50-50 matchup against Boba. If Boba is a deck that will struggle in the late game, if it hasn't dealt enough damage to the base, it will struggle in the late game. So you can play on that aspect to try to stabilize. And there's also a couple of cards that really do very well against Boba, which we'll talk about, which we can talk about now. So typically, what is the best way to counter Boba? So the first thing you have to be very aware when you play against Boba is the Boba turn. If Boba can easily kill something and do a double untap with Boba and play the 5-drop and the 3-drop, that's a big problem. So be careful to not give like an easy thing to kill with Bosk during the Boba turn. So try to disrupt the Boba turn as much as you can by not giving them an easy target, an easy thing to kill. Another tip I can give against Boba is to go space early on. Loads of space units early on against Boba can be very effective. If the Boba player did not draw a 7th speed defender, he can be in big trouble if you go on him. That's specifically for the aggro player. If you're an aggro player, most of the aggro win that I've seen against Boba I usually come down to the aggro player just putting a bunch of space in. Obviously, all depends on the situation. I'm just giving you like general tips, general advice, things like that. From my experience, have worked pretty well against Boba. If you're playing control, another thing is try to not give an easy target for the Super Laser Technician. One of the weaknesses of Boba is like it cannot kill his own Super Laser Technician, unlike Vader or Palpatine. So if the Super Laser Technician comes into play, and the Boba player has no way to sacrifice him, that means he's not going to be able to get the Boba turn one turn earlier, which can be a big deal. So don't give an easy way for the Boba player to just get his Super Laser Technician off and get his extra resources. Also, of course, about the specific cards, make an opening, the -2/-2, very good against Crafty Smuggler, very good against the 7th Speed Defender, really an excellent card against Boba. Traitorous, really good against Boba because the only real answer he has is going to be a Waylay, which is not really a great answer to it anyway. And it works great. It takes control of the most powerful 3-drop in the game, 7th Speed Defender, Boba Fett. Just a really strong play to be able to take control of those. Steadfast Battalion to deal with the Boba as well. ECL, Steadfast Battalion to one-shot a Boba. One of the strongest play you can make against Boba. Very powerful. Vanquish, very powerful card. One of the best answer to Fire Spray. Generally speaking, I would say Sentinel units in space really are good against Boba. So I'm personally a big fan of how's it called? Bright Hope. Bright Hope really good at stopping Boba. Later in the game, also Redemption really good against Fire Spray as well. It allows it to really block the Fire Spray. And if you're in a later stage of the game, always be mindful of Change of Heart that can really take you by surprise. Okay, so those are some good tips I think to beat Boba. Now let's talk about let's go over the mulligans and how do I usually mulligan and how do I usually play when I'm playing Boba. So draw 6 cards. Okay, so this hand does not have a ramp and doesn't have a turn 1 play, so this is an obvious mulligan. Okay, so this hand is pretty good. We go Carlos Spacer, turn 1, turn 2 Super Laser Technician, and then the ideal would be to find a 5-drops like a Traitorous, a Bosk, or a Steadfast Battalion to go for the big Boba turn on turn 3, and then double ready, play the Boba Fett. Really excellent. Here I would resource the Vader, and probably the Waylay or the Surprise Strike, depending on the matchup. Okay, sounds pretty good. We got the turn 1 Spacer, turn 2 Resupply, and then that's going to be the turn 3 Bosk, with some No Good To Me Dead Waylay to trigger it. I'll probably resource the Bosk and the No Good To Me Dead or the Waylay depending on the matchup. Okay, so this hand does not have a ramp. It's a little bit tricky, right? Because, well, you can go turn 1 Smuggler, turn 2 Spacer plus Greedo. And Fire Spray is a good card to have. Against aggro, this hand is excellent. Against control, a lot less so. So against control, I'll be considering mulligan this hand. But against aggro, it's an excellent hand to shoot first. On the Crafty Smuggler early on is really great, and Fire Spray is really great to race. Typically, you will side out the ramp after sideboard against aggro because you want to. You against aggro you don't want to be spending an entire turn to. Sometimes it's worth it. It really depends on the amount of pressure the opponent is putting on you. If he's putting a lot of pressure, spending a turn on a resupply or technician is difficult. If he's not putting so much pressure on you, you manage to have a pretty decent early game, then you can do it, and then getting your Boba early is very nice. Okay, one last hand. Okay, this hand is excellent. Turn 1 Smuggler, turn 2 Resupply, and we got the big Boba turn with either Barrage or Bosk on turn 3, and then with the double untap, we can go 7th Fleet Defender. Here, I would typically resource. I would probably resource the 7th Fleet Defender and the No Good To Me Dead. Yeah, I would probably rethrow those 2 cards and hope that I'm going to draw another 3-drop, which the deck has plenty of, so I'm not too worried about this. Anyway, I hope this video was useful for people who are intending to play Boba Green at a competitive level, or for people who are going to be playing against and want to understand a bit more how this deck functions, and hopefully they'll be able to do well against it. It's a very, very powerful deck. In my opinion, it is the strongest deck, and I hope that some people out there are going to find a real counter to it, because right now I haven't found any real counter to this deck. So we'll see how that works out, and thank you for following this video. Like and subscribe if you find this useful, and I'll see you next time for another video.